I, 32F, went to visit my mom when I saw my husband's truck at her house. That sight alone was enough to make my stomach clench. Mark, 34M, was supposed to be at a work conference. The conference was a good 2 hours away, in the opposite direction of my mother's home. There was no logical reason for his truck to be parked in her driveway on a Tuesday afternoon. A cold feeling started to creep up my spine. It was a feeling I had been trying to ignore for months, a quiet whisper that something was not quite right. My relationship with my mother, Carol, had changed after I married Mark. Before him, we were close, or as close as a mother and a cautious daughter could be. But when Mark entered the picture, it was like the sun had risen just for her. He was the son she never had, a charming, confident man who could do no wrong. She hung on his every word. She praised his ambition. She often told me, in not so many words, that I was lucky he had chosen me. Her adoration for him created a space between us, a little gap that had been widening ever since. He was her ally, her confidant, and sometimes it felt like I was the outsider in my own marriage and in my own family. Mark and I had been saving money for a house. It was our big dream. We had a joint savings account where we put every spare dollar. A large portion of that money was from an inheritance my father left me. It was a sacred fund in my mind. It was the last tangible piece of him I had, and I had entrusted it to our shared future. Recently, Mark had been acting strange about our finances. He would get vague whenever I brought up our savings goal. He would smile and tell me not to worry my pretty little head about it. He kept talking about a big bonus from work that was just around the corner. He said it would solve all our problems and accelerate our plans. He told me to just trust him. My mother had been acting strange, too. She started asking me questions about our savings. She would call and ask how much we had managed to put away. She would ask if I was letting Mark handle the important decisions. She would say things like, "A man needs to feel in charge of the finances, Sarah. It's good for his pride." Her questions always left me with a sour taste in my mouth. They felt less like curiosity and more like she was gathering information. Seeing his truck there, at her house, when he was supposed to be miles away, made all those little odd moments click together into a terrifying picture. Something was happening behind my back. I did not pull into her driveway. Instead, I drove past the house and parked my car down the street, around the corner where they would not see it.
My heart was pounding in my chest.
I felt like a spy in my own life. I got out of my car and walked slowly back towards my mother's house. I did not go to the front door. I slipped around the side of the house, staying close to the bushes my father had planted years ago. The kitchen window was open just a crack to let in the spring air. I could hear their voices coming from inside. I could hear them talking. I crept closer, holding my breath, my ear just inches from the opening. What I heard next shattered my entire world into a million tiny pieces. "Are you sure she won't find out about the withdrawal?" It was my mother's voice, laced with a nervous excitement. "It was a lot of money, Mark." My blood ran cold. "Withdrawal? What withdrawal?" "She won't." Mark's voice was smooth and confident. It was the same voice he used when he told me he loved me. "She trusts me completely. She barely ever checks the account statements. Besides, by the time she notices anything, it'll be too late. The investment will have already paid off, and she'll see I was right." Investment? We had not discussed any investments. Our plan was simple.
Save.
Buy a house. That was it. My mother sighed, a sound of pure satisfaction. "This is for the best, Mark. You know it is. That money was from my husband, her father. It's family money. It should be used to build a real family legacy, not just sit in some savings account for a little starter home she wants." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Family money. She was talking about my inheritance. My father's money. She was acting like it belonged to her, to the family, and not to me, the person he had left it to. "Exactly," Mark agreed. His voice was full of a greedy enthusiasm I had never heard before. "This lakeside property is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It's a legacy property. Once we secure it, we'll tell her. We'll present it as a big surprise. She'll see it was the right move. You'll have a beautiful place to retire, and we'll have a real asset, something much better than a boring suburban house.
A surprise.
They were planning to steal my inheritance and call it a surprise. They were taking my future and reshaping it into one of their own design, without my knowledge, without my consent. My mother's next words were the ones that truly broke me. "My daughter is just so cautious," she said, her voice dripping with pity. "She's not a risk-taker like you. She doesn't see the big picture. That's why I'm so glad you're handling things now. You're the man of the house. You know what's best." I backed away from the window. My legs felt weak, like they might give out from under me. I stumbled back towards the street, my mind reeling. Betrayal was too small a word for what I was feeling. This was a conspiracy. My husband and my mother, the two people who were supposed to love and protect me, were working together to steal from me. They were using my trust as a weapon against me. They saw my caution not as a strength, but as a weakness to be exploited. I got back into my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely put the key in the ignition. I drove away from that house, from that conversation, but I knew I could never drive away from what I had learned. My life, as I knew it, was over. A new one filled with a cold and quiet rage, was just beginning. I drove home in a daze. The familiar streets looked alien to me. The world felt tilted on its axis. Every stoplight, every turn, was a blur. When I got back to our apartment, the silence was deafening. This was the home we were supposed to be building our future in. Now it felt like a crime scene. I walked straight to our small home office and turned on our shared laptop. My fingers trembled as I typed in the web address for our bank. I logged into our joint savings account, the one I had so diligently managed for years. My eyes scanned the transaction history, my heart hammering against my ribs. There it was. 2 days ago. A single, massive withdrawal. A wire transfer for nearly 80% of our total savings. The amount was staggering. It was my entire inheritance, plus a significant portion of our own contributions. The memo line next to the transaction contained just 2 words. Familial investment, the words mocked me. This was no investment. This was theft. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, a physical pain from the sheer scale of their deceit. They had not just taken a little. They had taken almost everything. I spent the next few hours sitting in front of the computer screen, just staring. I clicked through old photos of Mark and me. Photos from our wedding, from vacations, from holidays with my family. In every picture, he was smiling, holding me close. In every picture with my mother, she was beaming at him, her hand on his arm. It was all a lie. Their smiles were masks. Their affection was a performance. I thought about my father. He had worked so hard his entire life to provide for us, to make sure I would be secure. He had trusted me to be a good steward of his legacy. And I had let him down. I had let this man into my life, into my heart, and he had repaid me by colluding with my own mother to steal what my father had left me. The anger began to build then, a slow burn that started deep in my gut. It was a different kind of anger than I had ever felt before. It was not hot and explosive. It was cold and sharp, like a shard of ice. It was a clarifying anger. It burned away the shock and the hurt and left behind a steely resolve. They thought I was cautious. They thought I was weak. They thought I would just accept their surprise and be grateful. They had made a terrible mistake. They had underestimated me. Mark came home a few hours later. He walked in whistling, carrying a bouquet of cheap grocery store flowers. "Hey, honey, I'm home," he said, his voice cheerful. "I got off early. Thought I'd surprise you." Another surprise. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I looked at him, at his handsome, smiling face, and I felt nothing but contempt. The love I had felt for him just this morning had vanished, replaced by a cold, hard knot of disgust. I decided in that moment that I would not confront him directly. Not yet. An open confrontation would be messy.
He would lie.
He would gaslight me. He would turn it around and make it my fault. No, I needed a plan.
I needed to be smarter than them.
I needed to play their game, but by my own rules. I forced a small smile. That's so nice of you, I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. How was the conference? Oh, he said, waving a hand dismissively as he put the flowers in a vase. Long meetings. Boring speeches. The usual. I'm just glad to be home with you. The ease with which he lied was breathtaking. He looked me right in the eye, his expression open and sincere, and told me a complete fabrication without a flicker of hesitation. He was a better actor than I had ever imagined. This was not a man who had made a mistake. This was a man who had a plan, a man who was confident in his ability to deceive me. That night, I decided to test the waters. I needed to see how he would react to a gentle push. While we were eating dinner, I kept the conversation light. I asked about his colleagues. I talked about my day at work. Then, when he seemed relaxed and comfortable, I made my move. I was feeling a little motivated today. I began trying to sound casual. I was thinking about the house hunt and all the progress we've made. I even logged into our savings account just to look at the number. It always makes me feel good to see it grow. I watched his face carefully. A flicker of something, a brief tightening around his eyes, was the only sign that my words had landed. He kept chewing his food, but his movements were suddenly more deliberate. That's great, honey, he said, his voice a little too bright. It was a little strange, though. I continued, pushing a piece of broccoli around my plate. The balance looked a bit lower than I remembered it being. I'm sure it's nothing, probably just a delay in a deposit showing up or something. He put his fork down. He was not looking at me now. He was staring at his plate, his jaw working. Oh, he said. Must be a bank error. You know how they are. I'll give them a call in the morning and get it sorted out. Don't you worry about it. A bank error. That was his first line of defense. A simple, dismissive lie. It was almost insulting. I pressed on, feigning innocence. Well, there was a transaction listed, I said. It said something about a familial investment. I didn't recognize it. Did you maybe move some of the money into a different type of account? Something with a better interest rate, maybe? He looked up at me then, and his eyes were cold. The charming, loving husband was gone. In his place was a stranger, a man with a hard, defensive edge. Why are you interrogating me, Sarah? He asked, his voice low and sharp. I handle our long-term finances.
I've told you that.
I have a plan to get us way ahead of schedule. You need to just trust me. Why is that so hard for you? There it was. The gaslighting. The attempt to make me feel like I was the one with the problem. My questioning was the issue, not his secrecy. My lack of trust was the betrayal, not his theft. It was a classic tactic of a manipulator, and for the first time, I saw it with perfect clarity. I backed down immediately, playing the part he expected of me. You're right, I said, looking down at my lap.
I'm sorry.
I just get nervous about money sometimes. I trust you. Of course I do. He relaxed, the tension leaving his shoulders. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully shut down my curiosity. It's okay, he said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. His touch felt like a spider crawling on my skin. I've got this, Sarah. I promise. Our future is going to be amazing. I knew then that I could not handle this alone. He was too good at this. He would twist every word, every question, until I was the one apologizing for his crimes. I needed to be smarter. I needed proof. And I needed to know just how deep this conspiracy went. My next call would be to my mother. The next morning, I waited until Mark had left for work, whistling that same tune as the night before. The sound grated on my nerves. As soon as his car was out of the driveway, I picked up my phone. My hand was shaking again as I dialed my mother's number. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the next performance. I had to sound normal. I had to sound like her loving, slightly naive daughter. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Sarah, dear. What a nice surprise, she chirped. Her voice was overly sweet, like she was trying too hard. Hey, Mom, I said, forcing a lightness into my own voice. I was just calling to check in. See how you're doing. How are things? Oh, everything is just wonderful, dear, she said. Just a quiet week over here. I've been doing some gardening, enjoying the sunshine. A quiet week. The lie was so effortless. She had just been conspiring with my husband to steal my inheritance yesterday, but to hear her talk, you would think her biggest event was planting petunias. I decided to set the trap. That sounds nice, I said. Hey, I was just wondering, did Mark happen to stop by recently? I thought he might have dropped off those extra gardening tools you wanted from our garage. There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was only a second, but it was long enough for me to hear the frantic whirring of the gears in her mind as she tried to decide which lie to tell. Mark, she finally said, her voice a little too high. No, dear, I haven't seen him. He's at that big work conference, isn't he? Poor thing, he works so hard for you. You should make sure you appreciate him properly. The lie was so blatant, so audacious, that it stole the air from my lungs. She did not even hesitate to cover for him. They were, in this together, a united front against me. The casual way she added the little dig at the end, the reminder that I should be grateful to the man who was actively robbing me, was a special kind of cruelty. It was a clear message. We are a team, and you are not on it. Oh, okay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I must have got my dates mixed up. Well, I'll let you go. Talk to you later, Mom. Bye, dear. Love you, she chirped, and then the line went dead. I hung up the phone and sank onto the couch. The last shred of hope I had been clinging to, the tiny, foolish hope that maybe my mother was just misguided, that Mark had somehow tricked her, evaporated completely. She was not a pawn in his game. She was a willing and enthusiastic co-conspirator. She had chosen him over me. She had chosen a fantasy of a family legacy over her own daughter's security and happiness. I was completely and utterly alone in this. The realization did not make me want to cry. It made me feel cold. It made me feel powerful. If I was alone, then I had no one to answer to but myself. There were no loyalties to consider, no feelings to spare. There was only me and them, and I was not going to let them win. My first call after hanging up with my mother was to my best friend, Jessica. I needed an anchor, someone outside the storm who could see things clearly. I told her everything. I started with seeing Mark's truck and ended with a phone call to my mother. I laid out the whole ugly story, my voice flat and emotionless as I recounted the details. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line.
Jess.
I asked, a flicker of panic rising in my chest. Are you there? I'm here, she said, her voice tight with rage. I'm just trying to decide who I want to punch first, your snake of a husband or your monster of a mother. Sarah, this is beyond awful. This is a nightmare. Tell me about it, I said, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. No, you don't understand, she said, her voice firm. You can't just let this go. You can't let them get away with this. They didn't just take your money. They declared war on you. You need to fight back. Her words were like a splash of cold water. She was right. This was a war. And in a war, you need intelligence. You need to know your enemy's plans. What do? I asked, my voice small again. You dig, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. You dig into everything. You need to find out exactly what they're planning. Check his email. Check his search history on the computer. Check everything. Knowledge is power, Sarah. Right now, they think you're powerless. You need to prove them wrong. After we hung up, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Jessica was right. I needed more information. I went back to the home office and sat down at the shared laptop. My hands were steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold determination. I opened the web browser and went straight to the search history. My heart started to pound again, but this time it was with a grim anticipation. The list of his recent searches was a roadmap to his deceit. How to legally move money from a joint account, spousal inheritance rights in this state. Can a spouse claim inheritance money in a divorce? He was not just stealing from me. He was researching how to do it legally, how to protect himself when I inevitably found out. He was planning for the fallout. He was planning for our marriage to end. Then I saw the other searches. Lakeside properties at Heron Point. Heron Point development plans, setting up a family trust. He had been meticulous. He had been planning this for weeks, maybe even months. I felt a fresh wave of sickness. I had been living with a stranger, a man who was methodically plotting my financial ruin while smiling and telling me he loved me. The real bombshell came when I opened his email. There was a folder labeled Personal Projects. It was not password protected. He was so arrogant, so confident in my trust and my lack of suspicion, that he had not even bothered to hide his tracks. I clicked it open. Inside was a series of email chains between him, my mother, and a realtor named Brenda. I read through them, my eyes scanning the words, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of their plan. They had already put in an offer on a specific property at Heron Point. The offer had been accepted. They were in the process of closing. The money he had transferred was the down payment and closing costs. But the most damning part was the discussion about the ownership of the property. It was to be purchased under a newly created irrevocable trust. I read the draft of the trust document, which was attached to one of the emails. The primary beneficiary of the trust was my mother, Carol. The secondary beneficiary, upon her death, was Mark. My name was nowhere on the document. I would have absolutely no legal claim to the property, even though it was being purchased almost entirely with my money. It was a complete and total theft, wrapped up in legal jargon. The emails also revealed their plan for me. They talked about how to manage Sarah's reaction. My mother wrote, "She'll be emotional at first, but she'll come around once she sees how beautiful the place is. We just need to frame it as a surprise gift for the whole family. We can present it to her at her birthday dinner. It will be a grand gesture." A grand gesture. They were going to humiliate me in front of my own family, presenting my stolen inheritance back to me as a gift that I was expected to be grateful for. They were not just stealing my money, they were planning to steal my dignity too. They wanted to trap me, to make it impossible for me to object without looking like an ungrateful, spoiled child. They were setting a public stage for my compliance. I closed the laptop, my whole body trembling with a rage, so profound it felt like it was going to consume me. The hurt was gone. The sadness was gone. All that was left was this pure, cold fury. They had made a critical error. They had written a script for me, a role they expected me to play. The naive, emotional, cautious little wife who would eventually fall in line. But they had no idea who I really was. They had no idea what I was capable of when pushed into a corner. I spent that night wide awake, not in tears, but in thought. I lay in our bed, next to the man who had betrayed me, and I planned. I planned my response. It would not be emotional. It would not be messy. It would be precise. It would be devastating. They wanted a grand gesture. I would give them one. The first step was to protect what was left. The next morning, as soon as the bank opened, I was there. I walked up to the teller and calmly explained that I needed to open a new checking and savings account, in my name only. I then requested a transfer. I moved the remaining 20% of our joint savings, every last penny, into my new, secure account. It was not much compared to what they had taken, but it was mine. It was a start. It was my first move in a game they did not even know I was playing. As I walked out of the bank, my new debit card in my wallet, I felt a small but significant shift inside me. I was no longer a victim of their scheme. I was now an active participant in their downfall. My next step was to seek professional help. Jessica's advice had been invaluable, but I was out of my depth. This was not just a marital spat, it was a complex financial and legal situation. I needed someone who understood the law, someone who could guide me through the minefield they had laid for me. My mind immediately went to Mr. Harris. He had been my father's lawyer for over 30 years. He was a kind, old-fashioned man with a sharp mind and an unshakable sense of integrity. My father had always told me, "If you ever find yourself in a real jam, Sarah, you go to Mr. Harris. He understands family, and he understands how to protect it." I had not spoken to him since my father's funeral, but I knew he was the only one I could trust. I called his office and made an appointment for the following day. I told his secretary it was a personal matter regarding my father's estate. Walking into his quiet, Wood-paneled office felt like stepping back in time. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with thick legal volumes. A portrait of my father and Mr. Harris on a fishing trip sat on his desk. He greeted me with a warm, sad smile. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle. "It's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Your voice on the phone sounded troubled. I sat down in the leather chair opposite his desk and took a deep breath. "Mr. Harris," I began, "I'm in a terrible situation." I told him everything. I did not cry. I laid out the facts calmly and methodically, just as I had practiced in my head all night. I told him about Mark's truck, the conversation I overheard, the bank transfer, the emails, and the trust document that wrote me out of my own inheritance. I explained how my mother was not just complicit, but an active participant in the scheme. He listened patiently, his hands steepled in front of him, his expression growing more grave with each detail I revealed. He did not interrupt me once. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his eyes studying my face. "Your father was a very smart man, Sarah," he finally said, his voice low. "He was also a very protective father. He loved you more than anything.
He worried about you.
He worried that your kind heart might one day be taken advantage of." He swiveled in his chair and pulled a thick, bound document from a filing cabinet behind him. It was my father's will. He opened it and flipped through the pages until he found the section detailing my inheritance. He turned the document around and pushed it across the desk towards me. "Read this paragraph here," he said, pointing to a specific clause. I leaned forward and read the words he indicated. My breath caught in my throat. The clause was clear, written in dense but unambiguous legal language. It stated, "Any funds from this inheritance, if commingled in a joint marital account, shall remain the sole and separate property of my daughter, Sarah, if said funds are used for any purpose other than the purchase of a primary marital residence mutually agreed upon, in writing by her." I looked up at Mr. Harris, my eyes wide with disbelief. "He knew," I whispered. "He somehow knew this could happen." "He didn't know the specifics, of course," Mr. Harris said. "But he knew human nature. He wanted to give you the freedom to build a life with your husband, but he also wanted to build a firewall to protect you, just in case. This clause is that firewall. Mark's familial investment in a lakeside property for your mother, purchased under a trust that excludes you, is a flagrant violation of this provision. Legally, that money is and has always been 100% yours." A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. It was followed by a profound sense of love and gratitude for my father. Even from beyond the grave, he was still protecting me. He had given me a weapon, a silver bullet. "So, what do we do?" I asked, my voice filled with a new strength. "Can we get the money back?" "We can do more than that," Mr. Harris said, a grim smile touching his lips. "We have several options. We can file an emergency injunction to freeze the funds immediately. It would be effective, but it would also be a very public and messy legal battle. It would involve lawsuits, court dates, and a great deal of emotional turmoil." He paused, letting that sink in. "Or," he continued, "we can take a different approach. We can use this leverage to force them to undo their scheme quietly and completely. We can give them a choice. Either they return every single cent and face the consequences within the family, or they face the consequences in a court of law, which would include potential charges of fraud and theft by conversion." He leaned forward, his eyes locking with mine. "The power, Sarah, is entirely in your hands. You get to decide how this plays out. You can detonate a bomb and let the world see the wreckage, or you can hold the detonator and make them dismantle the bomb themselves, piece by piece." I did not have to think about it for long. A public battle would be draining. It would give them a platform to play the victims, to twist the narrative. A quiet, decisive victory was far more appealing. It would be a private humiliation, a personal reckoning that they could not escape. "I want them to dismantle it," I said, my voice firm. "I want them to undo what they did." "Excellent," Mr. Harris said. He began to pull out a legal pad and a pen. "Then, let's draft our terms. First, the the immediate and unconditional return of the full amount transferred, to be deposited into a sole account of your choosing. Second, we will prepare a post-nuptial agreement that completely separates your finances from Mark's from this day forward, should you choose to remain in the marriage. And third, we will include a non-disclosure agreement, preventing them from ever discussing the details of this matter with anyone. It will be their secret shame to carry. As he spoke, I felt the last vestiges of the victim disappearing from my soul. I was not the naive girl they thought I was. I was my father's daughter. And I was about to teach my husband and my mother a lesson in consequences they would never forget. The stage for their grand gesture, my birthday dinner, was just over a week away. It was the perfect venue. They were expecting to be the stars of the show. They had no idea I was rewriting the entire script. The week leading up to my mother's birthday dinner was the longest of my life. I lived in the same apartment as Mark, sleeping in the same bed, eating at the same table. I had to maintain the illusion of normalcy, to play the part of the trusting wife, while inside I was a coiled spring of anger and anticipation. Every cheerful "good morning, honey" from him felt like a slap in the face. Every time he talked about their big plans for our future, I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. He was a man living in a fantasy world of his own making, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was about to come crashing down around him. My mother called me several times during the week, her voice full of a cloying sweetness. She talked about her upcoming birthday dinner, about how excited she was to have the whole family together. "It's going to be such a special night, Sarah," she said. "We have a wonderful surprise for everyone." I just murmured my agreement, my stomach churning with each word. They were so confident, so sure of their victory. They had no idea I was coming to that dinner armed for battle. Mr. Harris worked quickly. He drafted the legal document asserting my claim to the inheritance, citing the specific clause from my father's will. It was a formidable piece of paper, full of stark, uncompromising language that left no room for interpretation. It demanded the immediate reversal of the wire transfer and laid out the severe legal consequences of noncompliance, including civil and criminal fraud charges. He also prepared the post-nuptial agreement and the non-disclosure agreement. He sent me copies of everything. I printed them out and put them in a large manila envelope. That envelope felt like it weighed 100 pounds. It was the physical manifestation of my power. The night of the dinner arrived. I got dressed with deliberate slowness. I chose a simple, conservative dress, nothing that would draw attention. I wanted my words, not my appearance, to be the focus of the evening. Mark was in high spirits, humming to himself as he put on his best shirt. "You look beautiful, Sarah," he said, kissing my cheek. His touch made my skin crawl. "Tonight is going to be a night we'll never forget." "I'm sure it will be," I said, my voice quiet and steady. We drove to my mother's house. The family was already there. My Uncle Robert, my mother's brother, greeted me with a warm hug. He and my father had been best friends, and he had always been a steady, kind presence in my life. He was a man of principle, and I knew, deep down, that he would be on the side of what was right. My cousins were there, along with their spouses. It was a full house. The dinner started out as these things always do. Small talk, laughter, stories about the kids. My mother was glowing, the perfect hostess, fluttering around the table, making sure everyone's glass was full. Mark was in his element, holding court, telling jokes, charming everyone. He and my mother kept exchanging little secret smiles, like two children who knew a wonderful secret. They were building the anticipation, setting the stage for their big reveal. I ate my food mechanically, barely tasting it. I was just waiting for the right moment. It came after the main course, during a lull in the conversation. My mother cleared her throat, a theatrical sound that drew everyone's attention. "I just want to say how wonderful it is to have all of you here tonight," she began, her eyes sparkling. "Family is the most important thing in the world. It's about building something that lasts, a legacy for future generations." She looked at Mark, a proud, maternal smile on her face. "And I am so incredibly proud of the man my daughter married. Mark is a man of vision. He understands the importance of building a real family asset, something that will bring us all together for years to come. Mark picked up the cue perfectly. He reached over and took my hand. His was warm and dry. Mine was ice cold. "Your mother is right," he said, his voice resonating with false sincerity as he addressed the table. "Sarah and I have been thinking a lot about the future lately. We believe in making smart investments, not just for us, but for the entire family." This was it. This was the moment they had been planning for. They were about to announce their surprise, but I was not going to let them. I gently pulled my hand from his. The table fell silent. Every eye was on me. "Speaking of investments, Mark," I said, my voice clear and calm, cutting through the thick anticipation in the room. "I finally figured out where our house down payment went." The change in the atmosphere was instantaneous. The festive mood evaporated, replaced by a tense, confused silence. Mark's smile froze on his face. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights. My mother's expression went from beaming pride to flustered panic in a fraction of a second. "Sarah," Mark said, his voice a low hiss. "This isn't the time or the place for this." He was trying to shut me down, to regain control of the narrative. "I disagree," I said, my gaze unwavering. "I think this is the perfect time and place. After all, you were just talking about an investment for the entire family. So, I think the entire family should hear about it. You took my inheritance, Mark. The money my father left me. And you used it to buy a lake house for my mother. Didn't you?" A collective gasp went around the table. My cousins looked at each other in shock. Uncle Robert's face had gone pale. My mother found her voice first. It was shrill and defensive. "We were doing it for the family," she cried, her hands fluttering at her chest. "For all of us. It was a surprise. You're being so ungrateful, Sarah." "Ungrateful." I repeated, the word tasting like poison. The cold anger I had been holding back for a week finally surged forward. I was no longer calm. I was furious. "I am ungrateful that you conspired with my husband to steal from me. I am ungrateful that you both stood in your kitchen and lied to my face about it. Is that what you're saying?" Mark tried to intervene, his voice taking on a placating tone. "It's not stealing, Sarah. It's a joint account. We're married. What's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine." "Actually," I said, my voice dropping to an icy calm again, "it's not." I reached down and picked up the manila envelope from the floor beside my chair. I opened it and pulled out the legal document Mr. Harris had prepared. I placed it on the table with a soft thud that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. "This," I announced, "is a copy of my father's will. Specifically, the clause he had his lawyer draft to protect my inheritance. It states, very clearly, that the money is mine and mine alone, unless it is used for a primary marital residence that we both agree on in writing." I locked my eyes on Mark's. His face was ashen. "Did I agree, in writing, to buy a lake house for my mother, Mark? Did I sign any document authorizing you to drain our savings account for a familial investment that puts my money into a trust benefiting everyone but me?" He was speechless. He just stared at the document on the table as if it were a venomous snake. My Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "Let me see that," he said, his voice gravelly. I pushed the papers towards him. He put on his reading glasses and began to read. The color drained from his face. His jaw tightened. When he looked up, his eyes were filled with a fiery disappointment that was directed squarely at his sister. "Carol, what have you done?" he said, his voice shaking with restrained anger. "This is exactly what her father was afraid of. He told me he was putting this clause in. He was worried your jealousy of what he provided for Sarah would one day cause you to do something foolish." It seems he was right. My mother burst into tears. They were not tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, the tears of a child who had been caught and was about to have her favorite toy taken away. "I just wanted us to be a close family," she wailed. "I just wanted a place where we could all be together." "No," I said, my voice cutting through her sobs. "You wanted control. You wanted to control my money, my future, and my life. And you," I said, turning my full attention back to my husband. You went along with it. You betrayed me for a piece of property and my mother's approval. I stood up from the table. The finality of the movement made everyone flinch. You have 24 hours, Mark, I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. You have 24 hours to contact the realtor, cancel the sale, and reverse the wire transfer. I want every single cent of my inheritance, plus our shared savings, put back into a new account that I, and only I, control. If you don't, Mr. Harris will file a civil suit and a criminal fraud report with the district attorney's office first thing Monday morning. The developers of Heron Point will be notified that their down payment was made with stolen funds. Your reputation will be destroyed. You will be publicly humiliated, and you will likely face criminal charges. We will also be getting a divorce. The choice is yours. I looked around the shocked faces at the table. This dinner is over for me, I said. I turned and walked out of the house, not looking back. I left them all there, sitting in the ruins of the future they had tried to build on a foundation of lies. The silence that followed me out the door was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The drive home was a blur. I was running on pure adrenaline. When I walked into our apartment, it felt different. It was no longer our apartment. It was a temporary space I was occupying before the next chapter of my life began. I did not have to wait long for the fallout to begin. An hour after I left my mother's house, my phone rang. It was Mark. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. I said nothing, just waited for him to speak. Sarah, he said, his voice choked with panic. Sarah, please.
We need to talk about this.
You can't be serious. I have never been more serious in my life, I replied, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. Did you not understand the terms I laid out? They are not negotiable. But a divorce? He stammered. And criminal charges? You would do that to me? To your husband? You stopped being my husband the moment you conspired with my mother to steal from me, I said. You are now just a man who has something that belongs to me. And I want it back. The clock is ticking, Mark. 23 hours left. There was a long pause, filled with his heavy, panicked breathing. Okay, he finally whispered. Okay, I'll do it. I'll call the realtor first thing in the morning. I'll reverse the transfer. I'll do whatever you want. Just please, don't do this. I am not the one who did this, Mark, I said, and I hung up the phone. I felt no satisfaction, no pity, no emotion at all. It was simply a transaction. He had a debt to repay, and I was collecting. The next morning, I received a confirmation email from my bank. A wire transfer had been initiated. The full amount, every last stolen dollar, was being deposited into my new, sole and separate account. A few hours later, I got a frantic, groveling email from Mark with a forwarded message from the realtor, confirming that the offer on the Heron Point property had been withdrawn. He had lost his earnest money deposit, a not insignificant sum that had come from his own funds. It was a small, but satisfying, financial penalty for his betrayal. He came home that evening looking like a broken man. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading look in his eyes. He tried to apologize. He told me he loved me. He said he had been manipulated by my mother, that she had poisoned his mind with her talk of legacies and family assets. He said he had made a terrible mistake. I listened to his excuses without expression. When he was finished, I just shook my head. It doesn't matter, Mark, I said. You're an adult. You made a choice. You looked at me, your wife, and you looked at my mother and my inheritance, and you chose them. You chose money and her approval over me. That's not a mistake. That's a revelation of your character. Now you have neither. I've already spoken to a lawyer. You'll be served with divorce papers by the end of the week. He started to cry then, but his tears did not move me. They were just more manipulation. I walked into the bedroom, packed a suitcase, and left. I did not say another word to him. The next phone call I received was from my Uncle Robert. His voice was full of a sad, weary anger. Sarah, he said, I am so sorry. I am so deeply ashamed of my sister. What she did, what they did, is unforgivable. Thank you, Uncle Robert, I said, my voice thick with emotion. It was the first time I had felt close to tears since this whole nightmare began. His validation, his simple acknowledgement of the wrongness of it all, meant more to me than he could ever know. I had a long talk with her after you left, he continued. A very long talk. She doesn't get it, Sarah. She genuinely believes she was doing the right thing. She's so wrapped up in her own selfish fantasies that she can't see the real damage she's caused. She actually thinks you're the one tearing the family apart. I know, I said. That's what she does. She twists everything. Well, not this time, he said firmly. I've spoken to the rest of the family. They all know the truth. They know what she and Mark tried to do. She's not going to be able to play the victim here. She's isolated. As for you, whatever you need, you have my full support. If you need a place to stay, if you need financial help to get on your feet, you just say the word. Your father would have wanted me to look out for you, and I intend to. His unwavering support was a lifeline in the turbulent sea of my life. It reminded me that while my mother and husband had betrayed me, not all family was lost. My mother did not call. Instead, she sent a long, rambling series of text messages. They were a bizarre mix of self-pity, blame, and wounded indignation. She accused me of humiliating her, of airing our family's dirty laundry in public. She claimed I was being cruel and unforgiving. She said I was destroying the family over a simple misunderstanding about money. I read through the messages once, each one a fresh testament to her narcissism and her complete inability to take responsibility for her actions. I did not engage. I did not argue. I simply typed out a single sentence and sent it to her. You broke this family, not me. Then I blocked her number. I blocked her on social media. I cut her out of my life as cleanly and precisely as a surgeon excising a tumor. The divorce was surprisingly quick and clean. Mark, under the threat of the information I held, did not contest anything. He signed the papers, agreed to a division of assets that was heavily in my favor, and moved out. His grand plan to become a financial genius and the patriarch of a grateful family had backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable. He was left with nothing but a failed marriage, a lost deposit, and the shame of having his deceit exposed to the entire family. I used a small portion of my inheritance, my father's money, my money, to put a down payment on a small, sunny apartment in a part of town I had always loved. It was just for me. The day I moved in, I sat on the floor of my empty living room and looked at my online banking app. The full amount of my inheritance was there, safe and secure in an account that only I could touch. A sense of peace, a feeling I had not experienced in months, settled over me. But it was not just peace. There was something else there too, a cold, hard clarity that I knew would stay with me forever. The people I had trusted the most had shown me their true faces. They had not just tried to steal my money. They had tried to steal my autonomy, my future, my very sense of self. They had assumed I would be weak, that I would bend to their will. They had learned, in the harshest way possible, that I was not made of glass. I was made of steel. I stopped giving people the benefit of the doubt. I stopped ignoring red flags. And I stopped being the cautious, naive girl they thought they knew. They had wanted to teach me a lesson about my place in the world. Instead, I had taught them what it feels like to be small, to be powerless, and to lose everything that truly matters.